Thank you for joining us on the Going Deeper podcast, a ministry of Fathom Church in Littleton, Colorado. You will never get to the bottom of the depths that are in Christ for you. And our hope with this podcast is that it will help you go deeper with God. So let's dive into this episode of the Going Deeper podcast. What's up, everyone? This is your host, Kyle Knight, and welcome to the Going Deeper podcast, a podcast where we have conversations about many topics to hopefully help you go deeper in your relationship with God. I'm in the podcast studio with our missions minister, Karina Bost. Hey, Karina.
Hey.
And our lead pastor, Chris Martin. Hey, Chris.
Buenos dias.
Buenos dias.
Hey, do you realize, guys, that this is our last podcast of 2023?
Wow. That's hard to believe.
I didn't realize it until you just said it.
The last podcast of the year.
Oh, welcome to the end of the year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm
That's crazy.
excited. I'm excited. Well, and
it's the end of the year.
And the other side is we're getting into that New Year's kind of post-Christmas. What am I going to do for 2024? And I think that transitions perfectly to what we're talking about, because this is the time of year where we start talking about Bible reading. We start talking about Bible reading plan. We do a church plan. Like, what am I going to do for disciplines next year? And so let's talk about Bibles today. My favorite, man. I love this.
We're going to talk about Bibles and specifically Bible translations. Man, this is, I'm excited about this topic. This is a good, just interesting kind of topic to talk about. I don't know if we, and I'm going to say this from my perspective, in my opinion, I don't know if we think about it as much as maybe we should, or it just doesn't really cross my mind a lot, but we kind of deal with this topic almost pretty much every single time we open up our Bibles, every single time we go to church. We hear, we see the different translations, whether it's here at Fathom or our own Bibles, or we say, hey, if we hear a scripture being read, we say this is in the NIV or the ESV or whatever. So it's always going on. It's always around us. And so we wanted to talk about it. I think it's an interesting topic. So first, we're going to I think we have a lot of questions about this. What are the different translations? Which ones are good? Maybe which ones are not so good? What's the spectrum kind of here? Why are there so many different translations? But Chris, I'm going to throw it over to you. Now, you don't need to give us, we don't need to go into super deep history, but just give us a quick little, why do we have so many different translations of the Bible? Okay. And then we could talk about the whole spectrum about it.
One of my classes last semester, literally the whole 8 weeks, the last thing was that question, the whole 8 weeks.
So maybe I should ask.
So it is a huge thing.
Okay. So I'll tell you what I think. I'd love for you to fill in the gaps here, Karina. Okay. So believe it or not, the Bible wasn't written in English.
What?
Hold on.
Mind
Hold
blown.
on. Americans.
Now, listen, everybody knows that, and yet they don't. Okay. So the Bible, the Old and New Testaments were written in 3 ancient languages. Okay, ancient Hebrew is the Old Testament. Old Testament is written in Hebrew, which is not. This is different than modern Hebrew that is spoken still. Ancient Hebrew is different. There's some resurgence and renaissance essentially around speaking the biblical Hebrew, but it's not the same. Okay, so nobody speaks this. It's just it is a dead language, but it is what the Old Testament is written in, Hebrew. The New Testament is primarily written in Greek. Okay. And Greek is the language of the Roman Empire, right? That's what that was the common language in Rome. And so the New Testament is primarily written in Greek, though there are some sections in the Gospels where the language is Aramaic. And Aramaic was the spoken language in Galilee, in the regions where the disciples and Jesus were doing ministry. And so you'll find some Aramaic in your New Testament, but those are the three main languages. Now, by the time Jesus comes on the scene, actually the Old Testament had already been translated into Greek. That's known as the Septuagint. And so you do have an Old Testament Hebrew that has been translated into Greek that can be read in Jesus' day. So they've already started doing the work of translation. Okay. And then later down the road, when Latin becomes the main language of essentially the world, they translated the whole Bible into Latin, and that's known as the Vulgate. And that Latin translation is actually the baseline for many, many translations to come. But all that to say, I mean, the original manuscripts of the text, which, by the way, we don't even have original manuscripts. We have very good old dated manuscripts, but we don't have the original manuscript of all of the books of the Bible. But the very best archaeological preserved manuscripts that we do have are Hebrew, Greek, and Aramaic. And then the work of translation begins, and we're talking 2,000 years of history. Okay. So you think about it, it was originally written, the way translation happened is you'd have a scribe who knew both languages, who would take the Hebrew and write it off to the right in Greek. And that's how they got from Hebrew to Greek. And then how did they get from Greek to Latin? Well, they had somebody who spoke Latin and spoke Greek, and they started writing them. And scribes begin to write copies, physically handwriting copies of all these things. That's how that kind of stuff happened. Translation was pretty slow. Generally slow, until we reach essentially the end of the medieval times into the Enlightenment era, especially around the Reformation, because a guy named Gutenberg created what's known as the Gutenberg printing press. And that just changed everything. The method now to print was no longer do I have to handwrite all of these copies. I can actually, with movable typeface, print out copies of things, which made it immensely faster to mass produce this. That paired with the Reformation idea of the Bible should be read by every Christian accelerated the game of translation. So then, that's around 1500. Okay. So that's probably 500 years ago. All that stuff is happening. And over the last 5 centuries, translation after translation after translation has happened. As archaeology works backwards to try to find the best manuscripts to translate from, you may have heard of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Those were found in the mid 20th century, and those helped us immensely with translation. But as archaeologists work backwards, linguistics works forwards to try to translate into the best vernacular for modern readers in different languages. So that's me trying to regurgitate.
Professor Chris Martin over here.
Well, I'm not using notes. This is just me trying to
Yeah.
remember some stuff I learned over the 10 years ago. So I probably botched some of that. Okay. If somebody is listening,
Sounds
they're like,
legit.
this guy's an idiot. I definitely am. Okay. But I don't know, Karina, what did I miss? You just recently took a class on this. And
I think that pretty much sums it up. And I think one piece that I found interesting was the whole King James. He had godly people around him, and his push in the Reformation might be questionable to some people, but he did have the first Bible in English translated, which is King James Version, named after himself, which I always thought was really interesting because
the old King
As
Jimmy.
he should, man.
Love it.
I
Well, and that
Okay.
and the King James was the staple. It was the cornerstone for English translations for centuries. Now we kind of have jettisoned from that, although there's still King James only version kind of people where they're just like, that's the only thing. That's the only translation. So I get that. Most modern translations, to my understanding, are not done by individuals. They're done by committees of people and scholars, wide breadth of kind of peer reviewed as they're working through texts, trying to determine what does this actually mean? What is it? Because every act of translation is an act of interpretation. Okay. Because we're not working with original manuscripts, and because we're not working in the original languages, every word can be translated into a couple of different things. And so there's interpretive work in that. So the English Bibles that we read have been interpreted. They have been interpreted. And we are then interpreting them to apply to our own faith journeys. And so there's a lot of work involved in this. But I think it's really essential to at least understand on a cursory level how we got this book that we're reading and that we say is authoritative.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point, that maybe the reason why we are talking about this is because it is important to really understand like where this stuff came from, what we're reading, what version of the thing that we're reading, and also like what translation your church has chosen to preach out of, what translation you personally are reading from. Okay, so that was a good history lesson. I enjoyed that. Now, Chris, can you talk a little bit about we most likely we're not gonna go into every single translation here, but there is a spectrum, and a lot of people don't know this spectrum of like where each translation kind of falls onto, and but kind of talk us through what this kind of spectrum is, and like the big differences between the majority, like the most popular translation. So what does that kind of look like?
So there's really, there's probably more, but two general philosophies of interpretation when it comes to editions of the Bible. One is known as word for word translations, and then the other is thought for thought translations. That tends to be the two big camps for translations. Now, hear me. There's a third camp that we'll just call paraphrase. Okay. But let's pause on that for just a second. Okay. Word for word, thought for thought. Because paraphrase is a version of thought for thought. Okay. Word for word and thought for thought translations, both good translations within those categories, do read the original languages, the best manuscripts, the oldest manuscripts that we have, and they either translate word for word, as it's entails, with the idea that they're going to try and be as literal as possible. And that's probably the far end of the word for word, is they will just go as literal as possible. If there's not a word there, they're not going to try to interpret anything into that. All the way to thought for thought, where they will say, like as you read some of the Greek and some of the Hebrew, there's words that don't make a lot of sense. There's words that we still don't know exactly what they meant. There's words that have multiple meanings. And then sometimes there's transition words that we have to add in to make readable sentences. So thought for thought cares more about preserving the thought that is in the words, but making it more readable in a modern vernacular. Whereas the closer you get to a word for word translation, maybe they value the clarity of the reading a little less, but the clarity of the translation a little bit more. So really, you've got a spectrum of word for word, thought for thought. And then on the far side of the thought for thought is a genre called paraphrases. Paraphrases tend to avoid working with original manuscripts, original languages, and they tend to take multiple versions of an already translated Bible, so maybe multiple English versions, and they'll spin it to make it very user-friendly and readable for a specific target audience. So a paraphrase doesn't work with the original languages. That's the difference between a paraphrase and a translation, in my understanding. But that there's kind of this broad spectrum, and but that word for word versus a thought for thought kind of, that seems to be the spectrum in my estimation.
Yeah, and like paraphrase would be like the Message translation.
Right. And I don't know for sure.
And there's probably
like, I don't know. So Eugene Peterson wrote the Message. I don't know if he was using any of the original languages. He knew the original languages, so he may have. But the way I understand how the Message was put together, the Message paraphrase, is that Eugene Peterson was trying to, as he was pastoring a local church, his local church, he was trying to write the scripture down in a way that made sense for people in his church who didn't know the Bible at all. And so he just started writing things like in John chapter 1, where it said God tabernacled among us. He said God moved into our neighborhood. And he just really said, hey, how can I make this tabernacled idea make sense to someone who has no idea what the tabernacle is, let alone how to turn that into a verb? And so he's just said, I want to do this from a pastoral readability move. And I think it's beautiful. I mean, I really do. I love the Message. Though it's not a word for word translation, it's probably not great for deeper inductive Bible study. It is absolutely a great tool to be used for devotional or even for clarifying reading. Sure. Yeah, I love it.
Yeah. Let me ask each of you this, and I'll start with you, Karina. What translation do you read? It could be, and you could say here at Fathom, we go through the ESV.
This is a safe place.
This is a safe place.
If Nate Wirtz were here, we'd be making fun of him, but he's not here.
Do that at elders.
He's not here. He's not here. So there will be no, because actually, listen, I don't think, just so that everybody can just take their guard down, I think you read whatever, you read what you need to read. I mean, please read the Bible. If it's the Message, read the Bible. If it's the interlinear Hebrew and Greek, like, okay, read the Bible. Do whatever it's going to take the barrier down so that you'll read the text.
And I was going to get to that, but let's get to that now, because I do want to ask that question, and maybe it's as simple as that. Is there, because I feel like sometimes this could be a hot topic in churches, because I feel like it's almost like a competition of which versions, which translation is better, which translations are more legit than others. Some people are like, some translations you shouldn't read because there's just always seems like some tension between all of that. Whichever one you choose to read. So I guess my question would be that is, for those people out there that might think like, oh, there's a right and a wrong, or there's a few right translations to read, but there's definitely some problematic ones. Is the answer to that as simple as no, there's not. It's whatever you feel like you can understand, whatever is good for you at maybe a certain time period. Like what do we do with that? Of that like problematic tension between all of these translations that some people put on, not everybody.
Okay, so the tension is stupid.
Thank you for saying that.
Okay, that's just stupid, and I joke about it, like with Nate. Okay,
that is totally a joke.
Yeah,
it really
is totally a joke, because I've got, if we walked up to my office right now, I've got like 20 Bibles on my shelf.
And they're not all ESVs.
They're not all ESVs. Okay, now ESV is my favorite, but it's just because I love it. And that's okay. You can have your favorite. If it's NIV, if it's NIV 84, if it's NASB, if it's New King James, if it's New Living Translation, if it's the Message, okay, I don't care. That's like, the reason why I say it's stupid is this. It's like saying, oh, you know what? I only use hammers. I only use hammers. Oh, okay. That's great. But what about when you have a screw? No, I use a hammer. So listen, you can pound a screw in with a hammer, but it's not the right tool for the job. It's not, get you a screwdriver, you moron. Okay. No, and that's a silly illustration, but I think that's
a
something
silly thing to argue.
Yeah. So like, listen, if you're doing deep work in the text, really trying to make sure that you're accurate in what you're reading, what you're understanding, then I think you should lean more towards word for word. If you're maybe in a devotional season, or you're just wanting to really read the text for just to stir up your heart, maybe you say, hey, I really want to get more into a thought for thought, or a more readable, easier reading translate. If you've got a young child, please don't read for them the New American Standard. I mean, maybe. Maybe. Like, and hear me. That's fine if that's what you choose to do, but choose the tool based on what you're trying to accomplish with the tool. Now, here's what I would say to our church members. We preach out of the ESV. It's because it's my favorite, and I'm the pastor. Okay. But it's also a pretty decent word for word. It's not extreme word for word. It's still readable, but it's a pretty decent word for word translation. And I think you'll get more out of the preaching ministry at Fathom Church if you're following along in the same version. I think that's probably good advice, is you should have the same version of the Bible that the preacher at your church is going to be using as his primary text. I think that's just wise. That doesn't mean that's the only version you read. That doesn't mean that you have to read that one once you go home. But when you're sitting in church, you should follow along with the type of text that your preacher is reading from. But other than that, go have fun.
Yeah.
Gosh, I've read a lot of versions.
Mhm.
I went through probably 5 or 6 years where I read a different version every year for my 1 year. I did a read through the old King James 1 year. It was wild. I didn't understand half of it.
Yeah.
I had no idea what was happening.
Yep.
But it was really cool.
Mhm.
It was really cool. It's where I learned about he stinketh, Lord, he
Mhm.
stinketh.
Mhm.
Right? And the Lazarus story. I
Yep.
mean, like those, okay, that was great. You know? So go have fun with it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Read the Bible that you're going to
There
read.
you go.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And so ESV that we read here is more of that word for word, and then like I think more of like thought for thought might be like an NIV, NLT, those sorts of things. We're not going to again go through
Right.
all of them because there's a
Right.
bunch. So Karina, I'll throw it back to you again. What like, and maybe like, is there? Maybe I'll ask you this question. Growing up, did you have a different translation than maybe you do now? Or how did you get to what the translation that you're reading now?
Yeah. And the question that I totally derailed us from is what do you read? So
What do you read?
What do you
Yeah.
read
Mhm.
and what
Mhm.
was your progression to get there?
I think I'm just going to do my progression and then I'll end on what I read.
Mhm.
I think I had a teen study Bible. I think it was NIV
Yep.
growing up.
Probably.
I don't remember before. Actually, I had a Precious Moments Bible. I have no idea what that
Oh,
Precious
yeah.
Moments Bible was. And I no longer have it. And it kind of makes me sad, but that's beside the point. I think my next Bible was a New Living Translation, NLT.
Mhm.
I still have an NLT. I like the readability of that one. I like to compare it to other translations though, because I think sometimes in the paraphrasing they do get a little lost. But I like the NLT. That's what I had for a long time. I'm at the point in my life though, like going into school and just deeper diving into the Bible. I will read multiple translations at the same time. I like, I'm at Fathom, so I have the ESV. It's just as a practical one to have. But recently I found the New English Translation Bible, the Net Bible. I've appreciated that one because of all the footnotes it gives you. It gives you all the reasons they chose to translate the way they did. And so it kind of gives you a fuller picture in a way, but it also goes into detail, like what manuscripts they're pulling from, which could get really confusing if you because it's just all by codes that they
right.
all these coded manuscripts. But it helps you kind of get a bigger picture of the original, but especially when paired with a word for word. So I liked having a word for word. I like having a thought for thought, and I like the net that kind of is the piece in between the two of them.
Yeah, that Net Bible is awesome. It's free online. You can do all those things online for free.
And I think it's better online or in the Bible app because you can click the footnotes right in the text instead of like flipping down to the bottom.
Yeah, it pops you up. Yeah.
Who wants to flip?
Yeah, the New English Translation is really cool. I've used that in sermon prep, just as another I compare versions when I do sermon prep, and that's super helpful. Yeah, very good.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, and I think I've been with like an ESV since seminary, but had like an ESV study Bible then. But yeah, growing up in the church, you have like the NLT little kids Bibles. I think as a teenager we did NIV study Bibles, like the teen study Bibles, which are great. I love a good study Bible. It makes it like 3 times as thick to carry. It's gigantic.
Yeah, it's a weapon.
It is huge.
Bludgeon someone with that thing.
But, not a good like preaching Bible because it's gigantic. But love those. But yeah, I growing up, I loved the NIV. I mean, I'm even looking into our kids' rooms now. I think we have like kids NLT ones. We have some NIV ones. Like I'm kind of like both of you too. I've gone through a lot of the different translations, but I really do now I'm with ESV, and especially when we're doing like sermon prep stuff, but it is so good to have like, man, my encouragement would be to like get your hands on a few Bibles that are like across the spectrum. So you can, like when you're studying, you can look at what other translations, because there's been so many times where I've been reading even out of the ESV or whatever it is, and I'm like, okay, like I think I kind of understand what that's saying. But then you read it in a little bit different translation, and it brings like kind of just a whole new, not like a whole new meaning, but it just kind of kicks it up a notch a little bit, or gives you something else to think about. And you're like, oh, that was really, really helpful. And again, like Chris said, I think it's like whatever you're reading, read the Bible and read different pieces of it. Okay, so, and Chris, we know you're into your ESV, so I don't really have to ask you what you're reading.
Yeah, I mean, but as much as I love the ESV and read the ESV, both for devotional and also for preaching, I use different ones at different times. Just to get everybody's, I know we talked about NET, we've talked about NIV, we talked about ESV.
Mm-hmm.
There's a translation called the CSB, right?
Mm-hmm.
The Holman Christian Standard Bible.
I think we did some of that in seminary too.
Yeah, the CSB is still a word for word translation, not a thought for thought, but it's a little bit more readable. I think the ESV, I think they say it's like an 11th grade reading level. Ultimately, to read the ESV and comprehend it, I think it's an 11th grade reading level. And I want to say the CSB is like a 5th grade reading level. So I've got guys in Acts 29 in our network who are switching to the CSB, especially guys who are in like inner city contexts with less education in their congregation, probably on average a lower reading level in their congregation, and they're making some changes. So I think that's great. I'd commend that to people too. That's another translation you might want to check out. And probably all of these translations are online, probably on the Bible app, right? Like all of this stuff you can get. You don't have to like go to the Christian bookstore, which don't exist anymore, and like buy 3 or 4 books. Like they have them all online.
And especially if you don't have one or you don't know what translate, like read a couple of the like spend some time like reading them on in the app or whatever before, if you know, then you can commit to one that you know that you really like.
Yeah, that's what I would suggest. If you're still at a place, I mean, maybe you're a college student and you're listening to this, or younger, or even an adult here at Fathom, and you just, you know, you haven't given that much thought into this, and you really want to find a translation that works best for you. I would encourage you, like Pastor Chris said, to, when you are here at Fathom, like even grab one of the Bibles underneath your chair when we're preaching and read through the ESV. But yeah, if you're going home and you want a different translation, do the hard work in getting a few different ones. Go on the Bible app and keep switching back and forth and see if you're reading one of them, if it's a King James or even an ESV, and you're going, I am really struggling with what they say. I don't get it. Try something else. My encouragement would be, find something that you that just kind of clicks with you, that you are like, man, this is the version that I'm going to go with. I don't think there's a bad one out there. There probably is. Somewhere.
There are better ones, but again, it's just what tool are you looking for?
Right.
For sure.
Right. Any last thoughts on Bible translations?
I was just going to mention the chronological Bible.
Yeah.
It's not really I think it comes in all translations or most translations, but if you're ever looking for a unique way to read through the Bible, that's a cool one.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a, and let's be clear here. We want you to read the Bible. Like, I think this is one of the most important personal disciplines that a Christian can partake in. And so, just so you guys know, we are doing our 1-year read. We're going to start in a few days. And so if you're part of Fathom, you want to read along with us, regardless of your translation, like you can do it in any translation. We're going to use the Bible app that we used last year. We're going to have a sign up. You can go to fathomchurch.org/Bible. And you can sign up to join our group read. It's on the Bible app on your phone. So you can read it on your phone, or you can use the guide on your phone and read it in your paper Bible if you'd like. There's a little place for comments and questions. And so I know that we kind of did comments early in the year, and then most people just kind of stopped doing that, and that's fine. But if you've got a question about a text, you can put that in there, and the pastor's staff and other people will kind of engage with you on that. But this would just be a great way, especially as we move into 2024, to say, hey, I'm going to take seriously reading God's word this year. I told somebody, they were like, I just can't keep up with all of it. I was like, okay, just read the New Testament portions then. Like do a year read in the New Testament and skip the Old Testament ones. That's fine. You're like, listen, this is not legalism. It's not just about checking the box. It's about you spending intentional time in God's word, hearing his words for you.
Yeah, that's a good plug. And we'll link that below in the show notes to this, fathomchurch.org/Bible. So yeah, get on that. I mean, that's been super helpful for me this year. My favorite part is the comment section of just reading other, like, you don't have to comment. You don't have to have something to say, but reading other people's comments, whether it's Pastor Chris's or just a bunch of people from the church, just giving their thoughts on just during certain days. It's like, it's good to that's just a community piece of reading the Bible together, even though it's on an app and everything. Really cool stuff. Hey, thank you guys for this conversation. I think this was a good one. It was a lot of fun. Hopefully this is helpful to you, church. Again, thank you for listening this year. I mean, it's been a year.
That's right.
And we're at the end.
And there will be more.
Thank you. There will be more.
We'll see you in 2 weeks.
See you on the other side of the new year, whatever it is. I don't know, in 2024.
What a lousy ending to this podcast.
Wah, wah.
Wah, wah.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. See ya.